Ollamh Fódhla. Ollamh is the Irish word for professor now. The modern word is used, in modern times it's used to mean a professor. But in the old days, it was a great teacher who was also a great legislator. Those kind of teachers we had in India, still in Upanishadic times. You had the great teachers whose great words and whose great statements are recorded for us in the Upanishads. And people like Aruni and Yajnavalkya. And I suppose living in a time when we have substituted information for wisdom, I one morning wondered, if a great teacher showed up among us, what would he teach? And also, how would he or she become a great teacher? Certainly not by going through what is an offer in the in the institutions of learning. I think we emerged from the institutions of learning with very dangerous heads. I remember having been a teacher myself in an institution of learning. When I came back to Connemara once, I remember having to baptise myself out of my head, baptise myself radically out of culture and out of my education, out of culture and out of Christianity, so that I could start again with a new mind and new eyes. So the idea of a great teacher arising among us, what would he or she have to teach us, and how would he or she come to be a great teacher? You remember when the Celts came up Kenmare Bay or up Inversclena in their wonderful ships. I suppose there must have been wonderful seal-shaped ships or dolphin-shaped ships that they came up. Argan Glungal, the great poet, standing at the prow of the first ship, coming ashore, invoking the land of Ireland. And they did come ashore, and they came as far as the mountains of Slievemish in Kerry, and they met Boann there, and she claimed to be, and she was, the goddess of Irish sovereignty. And she said, yes, you may stay in the land, but you have to call it after my name. You have to call it Boann. They moved forward to Slieve Island in Limerick, and there they met Fódhla. She too claimed to be the goddess of Irish sovereignty, and she said, yes, you may occupy the land of Ireland, but you have to call it after my name. You have to call it Fódhla. And then they came to Uisneach at the centre of the country, and there they met another goddess calling herself Eru, and she said, yes, you may stay in the land, but you have to call it after my name, Eru. And today, to this day, Ireland is called Éire. But it is also, we are again back into where Pádraigh was yesterday with the triple goddess of Irish sovereignty, called Boann, Fódhla and Eru. And I, since I came back to Ireland, have no sense at all that I'm living in a place called Ireland, perhaps because I don't want to live in a place called Ireland. And when I come down from the hills where I live in Kerry and come down to Killarney, about halfway down I feel like showing a passport, because I'm now crossing out of Fódhla into Ireland.com. And I've that sense that under Ireland's fields is Fódhla. And it's in that dimension of Ireland. I imagine that Ireland is a land of three dimensions, a place of three dimensions, each with its different goddess, presided over by the different goddess Boann, Fódhla and Eru. And under Ireland's agricultural fields, under the whole economic thing called Ireland, agriculturally and industrially, under the floor here that we're standing on is Fódhla. And I think there's a great need to come home to Fódhla. So a teacher, great teacher among us, who doesn't grow up or share the values of Ireland.com, but he lives in that other dimension of Ireland called Fódhla, and he comes down now and again to talk to us. And I just wondered, what is it he would know? If a great teacher came among us, what is it he would have to teach us, or she would have to teach us? Are ye in? Will you go on this little bit of a journey? Is that all right? A journey below the seasons and below the gender divide. Okay? Into maybe possibly divine ground in us. So I'll do what I did yesterday. I'll just read this thing and comment as we go. As is the case with all other rivers, our river has its source in Nectan's well, and that is why we learn to speak. To learn to speak is to learn to say, our river has its source in another world well, and anything we say about the hills and anything we say about the stars is a way of saying, a hazel grows over the other world well our river has its source in. Our time being so other than other world time, it isn't often in our time that a hazelnut falls into Nectan's well, but when it does, and it is carried downstream, it is carried downstream, and if, passing from current to current, it is brought to your feet and you eat it, then, though in no way altered, sight in you will be pure wonder. Then, seeing ordinary things in the ordinary way you had always seen them, sight in you will be more visionary than vision. So, there was an evening in the Dingle Peninsula, a very quiet, wonderful, calm evening, and down in the road beside Fionnock, between Fionnock and Ballinangowl, there were two men, a Stroneshare, or as they'd call him there, a Law Bra, and Mike Filler, who was Pegsair's son. And the Stroneshare drew attention to, it was a very quiet, very calm evening in the Dingle Peninsula, supernaturally calm and quiet. There was a wonderful mist on Mount Brandon and the surrounding mountains, and under it, the mountain was as soft as rabbit fur. And it was seemed as if the sea had gone into some kind of transic meditation. The ocean was in a state almost of samadhi, of complete silence. And the only sound that evening on that road was the sound of a stream coming down Slieve an Uller. And the Stroneshare drew attention to Mike Filler about the silence and the sound. And Mike closed his eyes and thought and listened for a while to the stream. And he said, Tá sé ag gléachorin is dox is Syriac das will she féinic chat. It is calling us into the eternity out of which it is itself flowing. So this idea that all the rivers of Ireland, this is one of the old great ideas of the Celtic tradition, that all the rivers of Ireland, particularly the 7 big rivers of Ireland, have their source in Nectan's well, in the other world well. Now, I mean, we are taught in school that the Liffey has its source above in Paula Fúca, and that the Shannon has its source somewhere in Leitrim in the Shannon pot, and that the Blackwater that flows through Munster has its source below in somewhere beside the hills beyond Ballydesmond in Kerry. And that kind of thing. But if you went in to do your examination, your inter-examination, and they asked you, where is the source of the Liffey? And you said, the other world well. And they asked you, where was the source of the Blackwater? And you said, the same place, the other world well. And you asked, where was the source of the Shannon? And you said, Christ, I'm tired telling you, hasn't it the source in the other world well? And of course, it is fantastically blind of us, marvellously and fantastically and brutally blind of us to not know that everything has its source in eternity. There is nothing that hasn't its source and its continuing existence in eternity. Time, with all its seasons, is in the silence and in the rest of eternity. If it wasn't, if we weren't in the rest and silence and eternity of eternity, then the turmoil would simply be chaos. So everything has its source in eternity, and of course all the rivers of Ireland have their source in the other world well, sometimes called Nectan's well, sometimes called the Well of Segais, sometimes called Connla's well, depending on what part of the country you're in. So, and that is why to know that and that is why we learn to speak. To learn to speak is to learn to say, our river has its source in another world well. Why do most of us learn to speak? To end up speaking as they speak in prime time, to end up speaking as we speak in the morning news at 9, and in the news again at 10, and in the same news with a little variation, a further disaster added to it at 11. And that kind of economic talk that you hear, that we pay £300,000 to each other for conducting. I mean, why do we learn to speak? Do we learn to speak to celebrate the world that's behind me here, like? Or do we learn to speak about economic realities, about the Dow Jones and about the FTSE and about whatever it is we talk about? Do we learn to speak to be able to say £3 or 90 pence per kilo of cow's meat? Is that why we learn to speak? Do we learn to speak, to talk about wars and to talk about all this kind of stuff? We are talking here about people who live in Fódhla, and they learn to speak. Their reason for learning to speak is to learn to say, our river has its source in another world well. They're speaking the wonder and the strangeness and the marvellousness and the eternity of things, not the economic value of things. As Oscar Wilde said, we know the price of everything but the value of nothing. We see a cow coming down the road and we can only see kilos of meat. We see a tree and we can only see planks of timber. We see the night sky and we can only see God's handiwork. So, as we were saying yesterday, quoting J.B.S. Haldane, the world, it is my suspicion that the world isn't only queerer than we suppose, it is queerer and stranger and more marvellous and more wonderful and more terrible than we can suppose. And the gift of speech, can you just think of it? The gift of speech. To have never spoken anything wonderful about the world, or about ourselves, or about our neighbours. To just talk in the way that they talk in the soaps. Isn't that a crime against the gift of speech, isn't it? Isn't it a crime to have that your eyes would be economic brain tumours? Isn't that a most frightful and fearful tragedy, isn't it? And anything we say about the hills and anything we say about the stars is a way of saying a hazel grows over the other world well, our river has its source in. And this hazel that grows over the other world well, every now and again it drops a hazelnut or hazelnuts down into the well. And sometimes the well itself, being full, will carry that hazelnut down the rivers of Ireland, down the 7 rivers of Ireland, hazelnuts from the other world well. And if the current of that stream, if the current of that river, whether it's the Shannon or the Blackwater or the Liffey or the Lown or whichever river it is, if it carries it to your feet and you drink the imbus forosni that is in that hazelnut, then you will, strange, something wonderful will happen to you. I mean, we have the idea here, like, God bless us, like, sometimes you'll see Magnus Magnusson, wasn't it, the brain of Britain, and he spits questions at you, like, fast questions, and you spit answers back at them, and they spit, and they're spitting at each other, like, and it's very indecent to see it, but all the spitting. And you're called, if you succeed in spitting better than anyone else, you're called the brain of Britain. Now, can you imagine being the brain of Britain? Can you imagine, like, being the brain of Britain? Knowing all these things that the Encyclopedia Britannica knows anyway. So why in God's name would you clutter your head with all that kind of stuff when the Encyclopedia Britannica is carrying it? I mean, I used to have to remind my students in Canada that the Encyclopedia Britannica isn't an educated mind. I mean, I will give you all the facts. Let me see what you do with the facts, like, and let me see you do with facts that aren't even facts at all. Most of the facts about the universe are too shy to be facts. They don't want to be facts in that sense. I just walked out there this morning, down early in the morning. I walked down to the upper lake, and God bless us, like, those oak trees don't want to be facts in our sense of the word. Like, there's so much tremendous mystery about them and strangeness about them. Do you know what I mean? So this idea, like, that be the brain of Britain. You can be the brain of Britain and be a thoroughly bad husband and a wretched neighbour. You can have all this knowledge and be a thoroughly unpleasant human being, can't you? And in fact, we put most of our knowledge to desperate purposes. So anyway, but we're not now in that kind of world. We've dropped out of that world, and we're in a place called Fódhla for the moment. So if you drink the forosni, the imbus forosni that is in you, then seeing ordinary things in the ordinary way you had always seen them, sight in you will be more visionary than vision. In the new age that people claim we have now entered, there's all kinds of people out there claiming all kinds of visions, and most books that get written in the new age, it will be claimed of them and for them that some high power, some great intelligence, spoke the book through me. I was merely a channel. Everyone out there now in the new age is channeling all kinds of stuff, aren't they? Do you know what I mean? And because an angel has said it, if it is channeled by an angel through you, then it is supposed to be a book that you have to read. But very often you think that the angels are saying very foolish things and things that aren't worth listening to. So this idea that we're all the time lusting for vision. We want Mary to show herself yet again. I mean, if you showed yourself in Knock, well then show yourself in every village in Ireland. Jesus, don't just only show yourself in Knock, Mary. Grant me a very special vision of you. Show me yourself in a way that was never shown before. We're all searching for this vision. Jesus Christ, searching for vision when we can turn aside and look at a sod of turf. Just, do you know what I mean? When we are born into a place where we have the opportunity to look at a sod of turf. It isn't that you see, it isn't that you're seeing a vision that's important. It is the way you see ordinary things. Have you the wonder eye in you with which you can see just a sod of turf? I mean, to come home with the stupendous news after you're 3 days here or 2 days here, to say, what happened in Dundalk? I saw a sod of turf. Wouldn't that be totally stupendous news, to come home with? Do you know what I mean? Wouldn't it? I mean, I'm just saying, sight in you. There are 2 Easters, I think. There's the Easter in which we awaken to the extraordinary. We awaken to Jesus walking through walls and to people talking in tongues. Everyone, you talk in English, and yet everyone, no matter where they're from, Africa or Europe or Asia or whatever it is, they hear you in their own language. We awaken to a world full of miracles, and the world is full of miracles. So that's real too. We do awaken, but there's an even much more stupendous Easter. There is the stupendous and the great Easter, and that is the Easter when we awaken to ordinariness. When we awaken to the world that has been always all around us. And it is total calamity and total defeat and total loss and total failure of a life, sometimes I think, to never have awakened to ordinariness. The Grail, people went in quest of the Grail when it came into Camelot on Whitsuntide, and all the knights, 150 in all, set out to see the Grail more openly than they had seen it that day in Camelot. And of course, the Grail isn't a thing seen. The Grail isn't a particular thing that you see. The Grail is a way of seeing things. The Grail is a way of seeing ordinary things that are always all around you. Van Gogh paints an old pair of shoes and the Lord save us. That if you could see them with Van Gogh's eyes, that is Mount Tabor. That is the transfiguration right there. The transfiguration isn't happening in Christ. The transfiguration has to happen in your eyes. So, do you know what I'm saying? Do you know what I mean? And if it carried to your feet and you eat it, then, though in no way altered, sight in you will be pure wonder. Then, seeing ordinary things in the ordinary way you had always seen them, sight in you will be more visionary than vision. So the wonder is to come home, to come away from vision and the lust for vision, and to come home to the ordinary eyesight that we wake up in every morning. To know and to continue to know that any well we dip our buckets into as Nectan's well is why we are a people. At home in North Kerry, where I grew up, in a bleak part of the island, probably as bleak a part of Ireland as anyone could have grown up in. But we had a well. We had no electricity or no radio or television or anything like that during till I was 18, till I was about to leave home. But we had a well, and God bless us, it was just up the road, and my mother would ask us sometimes, will we go to the well for a bucket of water, you know? And I would just walk up a bit the road, and under a whitethorn bush, a great whitethorn bush, I would walk down 3 steps and take a little turn and walk down 2 more steps, and there was this perfect bowl in the shale rock, in the rock of North Kerry, and it was perfectly bowl shaped, and there was clear water in it with water beetles in it, and sometimes when you put in the bucket, a water beetle would come up and you'd have to take him out and put him back in the well. And there were hart's tongue ferns and maiden ferns under the whitethorn bush, and to dip your bucket into that well and to just pull up a bucket of water and come home with that water, and that's what I'm just saying, that to know and to continue to know that any well we dip our buckets into is Nectan's well. That is why we are a people. According to Bertie Ahern and Charlie McCreevy and everyone else in Fine Gael and Labour and whatever party you think of, we are a people for the sake of gross national product, so that we will produce more and more and more goods, most of them wholly and entirely unwanted. Gross national product, so that we can boast that there's more material growth in our country than in any other country in Europe. That is why we elect people to continue to govern us. Isn't that lamentable? Isn't that... It is beyond weeping, isn't it? I mean, if people... We talked about the need to keen, Porriking talking about the need to keen. Why don't we sit down here and just weep for who we are and what we're on about? Gross national product is why we are a people. That to me is below and beyond the Connla. I don't think we can keen for that. It is too out of the ordinary to keen. So anyway, to know and to continue to know that any well we dip our buckets into is Nectan's well is why we are a people. And there's something more about this people. We are a river people. Exile for us is to live in a house that isn't river mirrored. Isn't that lovely? Exile for us is to live in a house that isn't river mirrored. The house we're in at the moment is river mirrored, and for years in Connemara I lived beside the Ollamh River, and the Ollamh River was the most sensuous thing I've ever come across. Having its source maybe on the side of 5 mountains, it comes down into first gathering up in Turinacoon, and then it comes into God bless us, what is it called, the lake, the first lake, Loch Ina, and then it comes through Narrows down into Loch Derryclare, and then from there into Ballynahinch Lake, and then it pours itself down towards the sea, and it turns and it winds and moves, and it's a great, wonderful river. And I lived down below towards the end of that river, and the tide would come up at times and fill the whole world outside in front of my window, and the seals would come up, and there they would be, and the merganser duck would come, and to come home in the evening and to see, if I was coming home from Martinholland or wherever I'd be coming home from, I would see my house mirrored, the fire, my own fire mirrored in the water of the Ollamh River, and to sit inside by my own fire with maybe 5 ash logs, each log foaming at both its sides, like foaming out its sap or whatever, its wetness or dampness, and the lovely white flame of an ash log and the lovely yellow flame of turf. and arrived in Dublin once, and Chris, my brother, when he came to meet me, said, Jesus, you smell a touch of smoke. Like, because maybe it wasn't the greatest chimney in the world, but it was all right anyway. Do you know what I'm just saying? Like, do you know what I mean? The idea, like, to sit there and know that you're mirrored, and maybe a seal will rise there in the night, in the middle of your mirrored, of your being mirrored, you know, or that a salmon will leap in the night, or that an otter will fish inside in the middle of your fire. Like, out there in my mirrored fire, an otter is fishing inside in the middle of my fire. Like, you know, that kind of... So, exile for us is to live in a house that isn't river mirrored. And the pools in the Ollamh River, they are chakras, and they are opened chakras. And the whole river is itself a sushumna. It is what the Hindus call the sushumna, you know. That's where I lived beside for years in Connemara, and out here the cock salmon, when I lived in Ballynahinch, out here the cock salmon fighting below in the reds, below in the spawning beds. So we are a river people. Exile for us is to live in a house that isn't river mirrored. Our river isn't only a river. It is also the moon-white cow who will sometimes walk towards us, but not all the way towards us, on one or another of its banks. The river and the cow we call by the same name. We call them Boann. So we're talking about the River Boann. These people are living beside, this man lives beside the Boann River, which is bow, the Irish word bow meaning cow, and that wonderful old Irish word on, for the N, meaning brightness, as in the brightness of the moon or the brightness of the sun, solar or lunar brightness. So Boann, and Ireland, the old word for Eru, of course, is she's often called Eru on as well. She has the brightness of the sun in her being. So we now know that it's, listening to this man, that it's beside the Boann he lives, and the old name, of course, is Boann, the bright cow. So the river isn't only a river, it is also a goddess. The fluvial goddess, the river goddess Boann. Boann, the moon-white cow, Boann, the gleaming river. In dreams, I know it as cow. Awake, I know it as river. And my house isn't only river mirrored. It is mirrored in Linn Fake, its most sacred pool. And this is so because by difficult and resisted destiny I am Ollamh to my people. They call me Ollamh Fódhla. In their views of me, Boann, the gleaming river, has carried a hazelnut to my feet. We will find out that even though he is Ollamh Fódhla to his people, it isn't because the Boann, the gleaming river, carried a hazelnut from the other world, hazel, to his feet. It's because of certain kinds of initiations that he underwent. But he lives in Linn Fake. We don't know, Linn is of course pool, isn't it? Dublin, Dublin. Linn is the Irish word for pool, but we don't know quite what fake means. There have been guesses, but none of them is at all satisfactory. But all we know is, of course, that Linn Fake is the pool in which the god as salmon lives, in which the great god exists as a salmon. And he is called, it is the Daya, it is called Rua Roasa, the red one of great wisdom. So he lives in that pool in Linn Fake, and he lives also in Asaro, above in the falls in Asaro. In Asaro, the salmon god is blind. So I'm just saying that this is, Linn Fake is the pool and the Boann in which the god as salmon lives, in which the god in his form as salmon, he can walk out of that river and not be a salmon. But when he chooses to be a salmon in the Holy River, it is in Linn Fake he resides as salmon. So now what he does, he has told us that he's already considered by his people to be their Ollamh. He is Ollamh Fódhla, and he now goes on to tell us how he became Ollamh Fódhla. Is that all right? As these things often do, it began in sleep and dreams in the night. Standing in my door, I'd be tempted to think he was only a short morning's walk away, and yet it would often be nightfall before I'd at last turn back, not having made it. A sense I had is that the man I was seeking to reach was myself as I one day would be. In the most frightening of all the dreams I dreamed at that time, a man who had no face came towards me and said, "You are worlds away from him." When he next came towards me, he had a face, and he said, "You are as far away from him as waking is from dreaming." In the end, it was my own voice, more anguished than angry, that I heard. It isn't distance measurable in hours or days of walking that separates you from what you would be. It is states of mind, yours more than his. So this man stands on his door some morning and he sees a house with smoke from the chimney, and he thinks it's only a short morning's walk away from him. This is happening in the dream, and he sets out to walk to find out who is this new person who's come in, where did this house come from, how has it here, how did I not see this house before, there it is, and smoke rising from his chimney, and he can sometimes see a man standing in the door, and he wants to go to it, and he thinks, I'll be there in 10 minutes, just a 10 or 15 maybe, or a half an hour's walk, and I'll be there, but then it is already nightfall, and this house is still as distant as ever from him, even though he has walked all day, and he has to return. And then he hears, in a sense, he was seeking to reach. He finds out that he was seeking to reach. The man who was seeking to reach was himself, as he one day would be. In the most frightening of all the dreams I dreamed at that time, a man who had no face came towards me and said, "You are worlds away from him." Now, we know about the dimensions of Ireland that I talked about, dimensions of Ireland called Fódhla and Boann and Éireadh. So this man obviously started living in Éireadh. He's now seeking to cross into some other dimension of the land of Ireland, and it is in that other dimension of the land of Ireland that this house has appeared to him. That's where that house is. So it's worlds away from him. When he next came towards me, he had a face, and he said, "You are as far away from him as waking is from dreaming." Do you get this? The idea, like, that it's total states of mind. I mean, we have to move from one state of mind to a totally different state of mind. These are the great journeys. The great journeys isn't talked about. Francis Bacon talked about two kinds of motion, or two kinds of advancement: movement local and movement essential. There is the movement that from, say, here to Dublin, I go from here to Dublin, or God bless me, maybe I catch Concorde, I board Concorde in London, and I arrive in New York 3 hours later, 2.5 hours later, and that's supposed to be important. But more often than not, I'm just the same person who arrives in New York that I was when I left London, amn't I? That's movement local, just movement from one place to another. But then there's movement essential. There's movement from being a caterpillar to being a butterfly. There's movement from being ignorant to being wise. There's movement from being a sinner, if you like, to be a saint. And these are movements essential. So what is involved here clearly is this man thinks it's just movement local, that all he has to do is set out and walk, and he will arrive at the person he one day would be. But now he's beginning to learn that he will have to undergo movement essential, that the only way to arrive at who he one day will be is to go through movements essential. So it is states of mind, yours more than his, that separates you. Defeated, not able to reach this man by movement local. He feels defeated. And he has to settle back, and he can't even still quite see that it is by movement essential that he was Christ's passion and death and resurrection, that is movement essential. That isn't movement local, that is movement essential. So defeated, I settled back into my old ways. At this time of year, that meant that one morning I'd pull my door shut behind me and drive my cattle to high grazing ground between the paps of Moriarty. You mentioned those yesterday, Porcine. Up by the Boann, the paps of the Moriarty, the great battle hat, the Bov Caha. So she'll emerge in the course of this. So This man goes up between the paps, between the breasts of the great battle hag, of the battle goddess, of the goddess of war, who has three forms also. She is also a triple goddess. But she's the one who, in her form as Morigu, or the Morian, she will very often appear as the scald crow that we talked about yesterday. So he goes up between the paps to graze his sheep there for summer, up into a boolie house there to graze his sheep up there for the summer. My father, who quoted his father, had always assured me that there was no sacrilege in this. The idea like that he would go up and graze his sheep between the breasts of the goddess might appear improper, might appear sacrilegious. I, for instance, down below in Kerry, where we have the paps of Danu, Dalkeach Donan, I have never climbed them to the summit at all, because I would feel it would be sacrilege to stand on the nipples of the goddess. But I have put off my shoes at the bottom of the paps of Danu, and I have climbed up to a second elevation up there among the sheep pens, and I have gone no further. But I've always asked her for permission to climb up. I've always asked the goddess for permission to continue climbing, and if on any day I felt that permission wasn't there, then I'd come home. But anyway, I'm just talking about this man would have a conscience about grazing his sheep between the paps of so great and so terrible and so tremendous a goddess. But his father assured him, my father, who quoted his father, had always assured me that there was no sacrilege in this. According to the oldest ancestors we had hearsay of, it was in no sense a rite, or IGHT. It was in no sense a rite that we claimed. Fearfully, it was a seasonal rite we were called upon to undergo. This I took on trust, allowing that there was something more than good husbandry at stake. We live in a time of human rights, don't we? And that is fine. That is good. It is good that we have arrived at a time of human rights. But we talk now a lot about my rights, my rights, my rights, my rights. No matter who I am, or no matter how, well, whatever. I have rights no matter who and no matter what I am, basically. Well, that maybe is an exaggeration, but we talk a lot about rights. And the more we talk about rights, the less we have an opportunity to engage in rites, as R-I-T-E-S, great rituals that would in some sense bring us home to a larger and a grander and a more developing and evolving sense of who we are. So we live in a time of R-I-G-H-T-S rather than a time of R-I-T-E-S. So this was a rite they were called upon every year. He and his family, they were called upon every year to undergo this as a rite, and he takes it on trust. Up here, summer after summer since I was a boy, we shook off the vexations and the weariness of winter enclosure. Is this making sense to you? Isn't it wonderful? God bless us. I don't know that it is, but we'll pretend that it is anyway for the moment. Otherwise we won't keep going at all, will we? Otherwise we'll drop out. Up here in the heights into which maybe Moses ascended, up here into summits, because summits aren't measured in feet. It isn't in metres or in feet that you measure a summit. Summits are holy, are high summits, because they are supremely holy. And no matter how lowly the paps of the Morigu might be, they are holy, they are high and great summits in virtue of their sheer holiness. So up here the gods were not fenced in. Up here, when we heard him neighing, we knew that the horse god couldn't be cut down to cult size, couldn't be made to serve religious need. So we have the god in his form as salmon in the pool. When the god in Linfake, when he wants to be a salmon, he lives in the pool in Linfake. This same god now, the Daya, the Dogda, up here, he is the horse god. And he neighs in the night up here. And we say of him, Up here, when we heard him neighing, we knew that the horse god couldn't be cut down to cult size, couldn't be made to serve religious need. I'm using the word cult here now, not in its modern pejorative sense of they are a cult. I'm using it in the old Latin sense of cultus, of the full set and system of liturgies and rituals by which we would worship a particular goddess or god. The whole set of rituals and rites and prayers or whatever by which we would worship, sacrifices even, by which we would worship a particular god. And sometimes you think that our gods have been cut down to cult size. Sometimes I feel that we have cut Christ down to cult size, to the size of Christianity, to the size of Tridentine Christianity, to the size even of Byzantine Christianity or Russian Orthodox Christianity. When you have fenced Christ in totally, Christ is the one who walked water, like. And can you contain him who walked water in any sacrament, in any set of rituals, in any of our great sacred buildings? Christ is the one who walks water. Christ is the one who can walk through the walls of our buildings. Christ also will not be cut down to cult size, but very often in the way we relate to him, you have a sense that we have exactly cut him down to cult size, and we have cut Mary down to cult size. But anyway, up here, when he neighs in the night, the horse god couldn't be cut down to cult size, couldn't be made to serve religious need. Now, we're back into the strangeness of the world, queerer than we can suppose. God bless us. Up here there is a rock. It so challenges our sane sense of things that I long ago capitulated to the embarrassment of crediting what my father and his father before him used to say about it, that every 7 years at Samhain it turns into an old woman driving a cow. Now, isn't that wonderful? I mean, Inish Bo Fin, in the island of, there are two islands, the island of the White Cow off the Galway Mayo coast. There is a rock in the north part of that island, just in a salt lake in that island. And it is said of that rock that if you happen to be walking the road beside that lake at a particular evening on the 7th year since she last appeared, since it last happened, that rock will turn into an old lady driving a cow. Now, the world is stranger than we suppose and than we can suppose. So this young man still, up here there is a rock. It so challenges our sane sense of things that I long ago capitulated to the embarrassment of crediting what my father saw. He's embarrassed to believe that the rock turns into a cow, an old lady driving a cow. That's embarrassing for him. Sensing my difficulties, my father was blunt. If in the eyes of the world you aren't embarrassed by your beliefs about the world, then you may conclude that the wonder eye which is in all of us hasn't yet opened in you. Isn't that true? I mean, if we think the world is just made of facts called trees and stones and rocks or whatever it is and stars, just to say, if you don't hold beliefs about the universe that radically kind of embarrass you in the eyes of the people who live in the world of hard facts, and the world is also a world of hard facts, but you know what I mean, if in your account of the universe it isn't full of otherworldly and this worldly strangeness, then you may conclude that the wonder eye which is in all of us hasn't yet opened in you. That's how it was with me in those days. No sooner had I learned the world and learned my way in it than, standing in front of a rock or a tree, I'd have to unlearn it. I'd hear a story and think, that's it, that's how the world is. That story will house me. But then there she'd be, the old woman driving her cow in through my front door and out through my back door, leaving me homeless yet again. I mean, it is always, I mean, we think that houses of mortar and stone and bricks houses. We aren't, of course, housed in houses like that at all. Just as the way we can feel very naked and perished under our designer clothes, we are naked under our clothes, and we are wonderfully unhoused in the houses we build. It is in a great story that gives meaning to us, to our lives, that we live. If we haven't a great story, like the Christian story or the Buddhist story or the other stories that are there in the world, if we don't live in a great story, a story that gives complete meaning, a story that isn't just a story that is a religion. So this man, well, one who will arrive at the thing, maybe he'll read a book and he'll think, yeah, I've figured the universe out now, I've got it now this time. I understand the world perfectly now, you know. And he sits down, he says, I'm housed at last in this new story about the universe, and he's sitting inside feeling wonderfully comfortable in his new house, in his new understanding of the universe. And there she comes, the old lady, coming in through the front door and out through the back door, leaving him homeless yet again. I gave a talk recently in Killarney to an environmental conference, and there was a very excited presentation, you know, and a very good one, an excellent presentation from Father John McDonough on the new theory of the universe, and he was doing a wonderful job. But he started with modern science, like the Big Bang, the flaring out, and then the couple of billion years before the galaxies condensed, before all that matter condensed into galaxies, and then from the galaxies into planetary systems and nebulae and things within the galaxies. And he came all the way down to the birth of solar systems within that vast universe. And then like, he came to the evolution of life on our particular planet, but our particular planet is only one planet among billions of planets, like, and there'll be other kinds of life and the man. And it was a wonderful story, and everyone was delighted. God bless them. Like, they were all delighted at this new theory and new story about the universe, like, and it was all put up on lights. What do you call it when you projected? It was all wonderfully projected onto a big screen, like, and there it was, the whole total history of the universe. And I was asked to talk to this, like, you know, and basically applaud ourselves, like, for having such wonderful knowledge about the universe. But I told a little story. I said, Martin Hollerton was a neighbour of mine in Connemara, and at the time that I was working in Ballynahinch, I'd be in around 5 o'clock in the evening, and I'd be kind of cross because I'd hear Martin coming down the road around 5:10, and I'd want to be on my own for a couple of hours, maybe with Jesus. I'd hear Martin fighting with the dog coming down, and Martin would be fighting with the dog, like, to let us know, you know, that he was coming, you know, pure Gaelic, Celtic courtesy, like, to let me know that he wouldn't walk in on top of me, like. So he'd have no reason to be fighting with the dog, but anyway, he'd fight with the old dog, and I'd hear him coming and I'd be cross. And of course, Friday evening, Martin had already been in Roundstone, he'd have a few drinks in him, because he was drawn the pension, and he'd be wanting to go to Ballynahinch, and I haven't come home from Ballynahinch, I wouldn't want to go back up to Ballynahinch, but anyway, Martin would always get the better of me, and I'd let him fester some evenings, like, you know, he'd come in and sit in the fire, but he wouldn't sit back deeply into the chair and start telling me the old Shannon stories and stuff like that he was always telling me. This evening, like, he'd be much more clipped, like, in what he'd be talking about, and all the while, like, he'd be known, like, that he'd be putting secret and silent pressure on me to walk up to Ballynahinch with him. And in the end, of course, I'd have to concede and say, yeah, okay, Martin, we'll go up, you know. He'd be saying, like, that he'd ate salty fish and the thirst. Jesus, no, John, don't give me tea, like. Don't give me tea, John. Tea, no, there's no cure. There's no, the tongue, the salty fish, like salty gunner, like, no, tea won't cure it, like. And he'd be telling me like that he wanted me to walk up. And I remember, like, one evening, and to take Martin, say, okay, Martin, and Martin, like a little Barry Fitzgerald of a man, standing up, like, and saying, looking up at me, knowing that I was cross, saying, no use hanging a man without a head, John. No use hanging a man without a head, like. And I mean, what can you do with someone like that? Like, you know, Jesus Christ, like, you know, you're defeated totally by that kind of man, you know. So I remember walking out with him this particular night, like, and I there's a high threshold. I talked yesterday about the horse hoof and that threshold when we feed the horse. And Martin limped across the kitchen floor and down over the fish. And I said to Martin, is that our knee bad with you again? And he said, well, now, John, of course, he's delighted now that he's gone up to the pub, lame or not lame, like it doesn't matter, he's gone to the pub. Well, now, John, there's nothing in the wide earthly world wrong at that knee, except that the power is clean gone from it. the lovely bit of Irish syntax. You know, he erases that in Kerry. There's nothing in the wide earthly world. You know, you can't just say, you have to. It has to be big. It has to sound wonderful in a big world. Like there's nothing. Well, now, John, there's nothing in the wide earthly world wrong at that knee, except that the power is clean gone from it, and that of course means that I'd have to link arms with him and virtually carry him up the road. But anyway, that night at the end, at closing time, Martin he never had a problem with belief in God, but tonight after the next few pints he was proud of God, proud of God and his blessed mother and the Holy Mass within Ramstone, and I had to manage to get him down the road anyway and bring him home, and he was falling in out of complete stupor and drunkenness, but then he'd rally a bit and he'd be a bit sober, a small bit sober, and then he'd fall back into it again. And we came to Coughlin's Quarry, and he said, "Where are we, John?" And I said, "We're at Coughlin's Quarry, Martin." And he said, "How do you know?" And I stood him in the middle of the road and I said, "Now, Martin, do you hear the roaring in the river there?" And he said, "I do." And I said, "Martin, now that's the roaring at the Eelweir." And I said, "Do you hear a roaring further off, down a little bit?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "That's the roaring at Ted's place." And I said, "Below Ted's place is Lynn's place, and below Lynn's place is my place, and round the corner from my place is Peter Welch's place, and up the boateen from Peter Welch's place is your place." And he said, "You ha' me mesmerised with places. Where are we?" So poor Martin, God bless Martin. He's still alive. Martin's still alive. God bless him. But anyway, I stood him in the middle of the road and said, "Martin, you won't fall now. I'm behind you. You're all right. You won't fall, Martin. God bless you." I held his shoulders and "You're all right now, Martin. Will you look ahead of you, Martin, and keep looking, and maybe you'll see the rock wall in front of you." And Martin stood there for a long time, and he got down on his knees and he was looking and looking and looking and looking, and me waiting behind him. And anyway, he said, "John," eventually, "are you there, John?" And I said, "I am, Martin." And he said, "Oh, John, oh, sure I know well where we are now, John, but where the fuck are we?" So I was in Killarney, and someone projected up behind us was the whole history of the universe. And looking at that, we were supposed to know where we were. And I said, "Oh, looking at that, the history of galaxies, and don't I know well where we're now? But where fuck are we?" There's fundamentalism in religion that we choose to not like at all. Someone puts a foot in your door and they will tell you the Bible says, and if the Bible says it, that's it, isn't it? There's no argument with the Bible. But we also live in a world that is even more dangerously fundamentalist in its science, because you will also hear "science says." And if science speaks ex cathedra, then that's supposed to be the truth, isn't it? There's no arguing with science. If science says water is composed of H2O, even though it's mirroring me singing Loch Shiel inside, it's still composed of H2O. What is really destroying modern mind, the mind of modern humanity, is not biblical or Quranic fundamentalism. What is stupendously destroying modern mind is scientific fundamentalism. So this is what I say, we arrive at Newton's laws of gravity and we think, yeah, we've understood it, but the old lady, there she is, coming in the front door and out the back door, driving the cow. We arrive at E equals MC squared with Einstein, and the Lord saves. We think, now at last we figured it out, or maybe we're on the way to figuring it out, and there she is, the old lady driving her cow in the front door and out the back door, leaving us homeless yet again. So, do you know what I mean? The easiest thing in the world is to have theories and creeds about the world, isn't it? But our theories and creeds about the world somehow damage us hugely. It is wonderful sometimes to not know the world, to go out and not know it, to have no theory about it, no creed about it. I was scandalised, poor Kathleen McCann sometimes actually reminded me, as it was coming up to Lent, Kathleen, a great neighbour, great Christian, mighty woman, wonderful neighbour, and she'd been nagging me sometimes, not nagging me, but she'd been reminding me, Lent now, coming up to Lent now, Shrove Tuesday, next Tuesday, and after that, Ash Wednesday, and live the good Christian life. She wouldn't, Kathleen, not at all, no fundamentalism in Kathleen at all, wonderful, wonderful, wonderful woman, Christian, But one day she asked me, and what are you fasting for Lent, John, And I said, I'm fasting from Christian doctrine. I want to give Jesus a break from all my beliefs about him. It might be no harm to cut Christ down from Christology for a while, to not fence him in too totally to Christian belief. Isn't it the truth, isn't it? Jesus said, the birds of the air have nests, the foxes have holes, the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. Maybe not only have I nowhere outside my head on which to lay my head, maybe I should have nowhere within my head also, no theory or creed upon which to lay my head. So do you get the sense of where this man is going? This man is having to learn that you don't lay your head on any new theory or creed about the universe. Can you see the education? Can you see what's happening to him? Yeah. And it wasn't just anywhere I was homeless. I was homeless on the high grazing ground between the paps of Morrigu. And it wasn't by hearsay that however red-mouthed she was, Morrigu was divine. All the more divine in my eyes because, like the horse god who neighed only at night, she would never submit to religious servility. Though a people prayed to her, she wouldn't send rain in a time of drought, or stand in battle with them against an invader. So again, we have this idea of a goddess who will not submit to religious servility. We turn kind of Christ and God into St. Jude, don't we? When you go to ask God, please God, I desperately desire you now, and I almost insist that you give that my daughter gets 7 honours in the leaving so she wants to go on and become a doctor, And we pray and we pray and we pray, and God bless us, Do you know what I mean? We make them into total servants, don't we? The gods and goddesses, they are slaves to us, aren't they? They are slaves to our every wish. They are slaves to our outlandish desires. They are slaves to our unholy desires, aren't they? But here is the Morrigu. She who was red-mouthed, I talked about her yesterday, her mouth bleeds, and the way my mouth waters, her mouth bleeds like an anticipation of carnage. And she will not submit to religious servility. Though a people prayed to her, she wouldn't send rain in a time of drought or stand in battle with them against an invader. Worship of Morrigu, of red-mouthed Morrigu, had to be pure. And that's what I did up here. Up here every summer, between the breasts of a goddess, who in her form a skull-crow called above me every day, circle and call, searching for afterbirth, searching for corpses, searching for carrion. The skull-crow, that's what she does. She circles the land. They're over my house every morning when I wake. I'm almost sure to hear the skull-crows circling, and they're looking for afterbirths in the spring. They're looking for corpses. They're searching for carrion. And I told you yesterday about if a ewe is giving birth and she's having difficulty, then they will come down and pick out the ew's eyes. So that is the goddess that in some sense I am between her breasts. I spend the time between the breasts of a goddess who is mostly dreadful and terrible. And that is the rite he is called to undergo every summer. The contradiction ploughed me. It ploughed me and harrowed me. 'Twas as if the breasts of the mother goddess had become the paps of the battle goddess. And to live between the paps was to live in trepidation of the divine embrace. I mean, you're up between the breasts of the Morigu. Now, supposing she one day decided to embrace you, would you survive that embrace? The embrace of the battle hag? It might be quite unlikely that you would. Because in her other forms, she will be much too much for any human being to survive. So the contradiction between breasts which nourish, the breasts that nourish, and yet she is beaked and she is clawed and she is searching for carrion. She is searching for corpses and she will pick the eyes out of yours. So the contradiction between the woman as nourisher and the woman as destroyer here, like, is very strong here, isn't it? You get the thing anyway, don't you? You know, but the contradiction between the nourishing breasts and the beak that picks the eye out of a mother yo's head is the contradiction that ploughs him. Sometimes hearing her call as the skullcrow calls, I would hear a demand. You must be religious, but in being religious, you must have no recourse to religion. Now, will you live with that one? You must be religious, but in being religious, you must have no recourse to religion. Religion is in many ways a necessary kind of insulating set of rituals and rites that in a sense protects us, comes between us and God. If we didn't have religion between us and the divine, it would be much too naked. It would be like live wire to live wire. It would be much too naked a relationship. Luther seemed at one stage, when he got rid of all the sacraments, or as many sacraments as he felt were untrue, he basically got rid of a lot of rites and religion and rituals, as did the entire Protestant tradition. And very often, I think, they got rid of too much too soon, because there was Luther in the presence of what he called the Deus nudus, the naked God, and the Deus devorans, the devouring God, with no kind of intervening set of myths and rituals and archetypes and comings and goings between you and the God. Do you know what I mean? That maybe I think that Luther could have caused huge psychic damage to the European psyche in expecting that we could relate that way to God, that was possible for us continuously. Maybe it isn't continuously possible for us. Maybe we need the insulation of rite and ritual and more rites and more rituals. I don't know. I'm just saying, this man hears, when he hears the skullcrow, when he hears the Morigu calling above him, he hears a demand. You must be religious, but in being religious, you must have no recourse to religion. Can you get that? You get that, don't you? I mean, I think because of what is happening now in the Christian churches, or the Christian Catholic Church in Ireland, I mean, a lot of people are finding maybe that they yearn to be religious, but they aren't having recourse to the religion as they find it. So you must be religious, but have no recourse to religion. That is a tough one, isn't it? But that's what's demanded of him up here in these Mosaic heights. These are the heights into which Moses ascended. Most of us do not live in those heights at all. So that is it, I thought. That is the seasonal rite. To be religious up here is to fast from religion. Still with it? These were heights I wasn't continuously able for. Always by summer's end I'd have lost my nerve, and now again I would pull a door shut behind me and I would go down, me and my cattle going down to the shelter of the woods and swards along the river, and I going down to the shelter of traditional religion and story. So you see, coming down to the shelter of traditional religion and story. In the way that the cows would be sheltered by the trees and the woods along the river, he would find shelter not in houses down there, but in traditional religion and story. Here, as well as being the moon-white cow, the goddesses Boann, the gleaming river, down here we are river mirrored, and since it is the same river that mirrors us, we are a people. Have you got that? The Holy River, that's why we are a people, because we're all mirrored by the same river, and it is a sacred river, a holy river. So we aren't a people because we're all putting our shoulder to the wheel of Ireland.com. My house, I'd love ye to just listen, look at the next paragraph as we read it. My house is mirrored in Lynn Fake. In a sense, therefore, I sleep in Lynn Fake, I dream in Lynn Fake. At a sleeping depth of me that I'm not always aware of, maybe I am a salmon in Lynn Fake, and maybe I swim upstream every night all the way up into the other world, all the way up into Nectan's well. At that depth of myself, maybe the shadows of the other world hazel are always upon me, are always upon all of us, letting wisdom and wonder drop down into us. Now, Freud, at the beginning of the century, of the 20th century rather, published a book called The Interpretation of Dreams. But this was only a revelation to people who hadn't been reading European literature or who hadn't been living from any great depth in themselves. And we discovered that there's all kinds of animal impulses and instincts in us that we keep hugely repressed. Freud talked about the structure of human inwardness as the superego, the ego, and the id. And the id is the animal, that whole layer of animal instinct and impulse, particularly the sexual impulse in Freud's view of it, that exists down there and that are pushed down and repressed. But anything that you repress in that way will keep emerging. It will keep finding a way through, and usually when it finds its way through, it will find its way through as a neurotic symptom. When you repress the animal in you, it is very possible that the animal in you, as I said yesterday, will turn into beast in you. But this is the view of ourselves that we mainly live with now, that down below, that place from which nightmares emerge in us. We have some horrifying nightmares at times, and we think, is that what's the root of me? Is there a root of me down there that sends up these nightmares at me? And if that's the deepest root in me and of me, then I want nothing to do with it. Then I want to run from myself. Then I want to find exile from me in a job, in being busy, in being a husband, in being a wife, in being a butcher, a baker, a candlestick maker. Let me be busy, Lord. Let me be so busy that I exist in a state of complete forgetfulness as to what might be deep down in my nature. So I talked yesterday about the tourniquet that we sometimes wear to keep out that lower nature. But the tourniquet doesn't keep out that lower nature. Now, it seems to me that Freud saw well. In seeing what he saw truly. But he didn't go far enough, because below that animal level in us, below that level of animal impulse and energy in us, is something altogether more wonderful. I talked at the beginning of this talk that we would go below the gender divide in us, that we would go below the seasons of nature in us, into some place deeper than either the gender divide or the seasons in us. So, can I say now, can you listen? As I, in a few sentences, give you, each one of you, your biography. that I will tell you who in your depths you are. We know who we are sociologically, don't we? I mean, I have a job. I am a husband. I'm a wife. I'm a nun, I'm a priest, I'm a butcher, a baker, a candlestick maker, I work at this and I live here and these are my neighbours and I go here for my holidays. That's who I am sociologically, isn't it? Now, who am I prior and deeper than who I am sociologically? Is there a me that is deeper than who I am sociologically? Now, can I just tell you who you are in those places that are deeper than who you are sociologically? Will you just listen as I speak it to you? And I'll be talking, this is Ollamh Fódhla talking, my house is mirrored in Linfake. I will change that now and talk to each one of you. Whoever you are in this audience, your house is mirrored in Linfake. In a sense, therefore, you sleep in Linfake, you dream in Linfake. At a sleeping depth of you that you're not aware of, maybe you are a salmon in Linfake, and maybe you swim upstream every night all the way up into the other world well, all the way up into Nectan's well. At that depth of yourself, maybe the shadows of the other world hazel are always upon you, are always upon all of us, letting wisdom and wonder drop down into us. That, in very deep place within you, is who each of you is. Every night, unknown to consciousness and conscious inspection, you are a salmon in Linfake. You swim up to the other world well. The hazel that overgrows that well drops kernels of wisdom and wonder down into you. That is who you are. Not your curriculum vitae, not who your society knows you to be, not who you yourself, in complicity with your society, in culpable complicity with your society and your surroundings, know yourself to be. So, if we did know this about ourselves, and we began to live from this reach of ourselves, then in some way, I think we couldn't be corrupted by society. We would find ourselves walking much more often in the woods and not listening to the news at 9 and the same news at 10 and the same news with another disaster at 11. We would be able to separate ourselves from who we sociologically are. We would be able to redeem ourselves and to liberate ourselves from who we sociologically are. I went out to the hazel wood because a fire was in my head and plucked and peeled a hazel wand and hooked a berry to a thread. And when white watts were on the wing and moth like stars were flickering out, I cast the berry in a stream and caught a little silver trout. When I had laid it on the floor, I went to blow the fire aflame, but something rustled on the floor and someone called me by my name. It had become a glimmering girl with apple blossom in her hair, who called me by my name and ran and faded through the brightening air. Though I am old with wandering through hollow lands and hilly lands, I will find out where she has gone and kiss her lips and take her hands and walk among long dappled grass and pluck till time and times are done the silver apples of the moon, the golden apples of the sun. And going to work in Connemara sometimes, if someone asked me, "Where are you after this morning, John?" I'd say, well, maybe I'm going to work in Lisnabrucka, but in a deeper sense, I'm following the girl with apple blossom in her hair. And 'tis an awful calamity like to never follow the girl with apple blossom in her hair. So who am I in Foxrock? Who am I in the highest house in Howth? Who am I in my £5 million house going up by £100 every week? Who am I in Crumlin? Who am I in the square in Tala? But we can get all too weary of who we are in those places. But a freshness will come into our lives the day we ask ourselves, who am I in the hazelwood? Go into the hazelwood because the fire is in your head. Who are you in the hazelwood? You are in the core of your being. I'm not talking about the foundation of your being yet, because we have to go from where we are now to elsewhere within us. But you are a salmon in Linfake. You are every night swim up to Nectan's well, the other world well, and the hazelnut, the hazel tree, drops kernels of wisdom and wonder down into you every night. You have no excuse, we have no excuse to be complicit with society. We have no excuse to be complicit with, we have no alibi to not be who we are below the beast in us. So can we move on from there, because there is a below Nectan's well as well. Nectan's well isn't the end of our journey, of our inner interior journey. Could it be that we are safer in our depths than we are in our heights? Or could it be that we will only be safe in our heights when we already know that we are safe in our depths? If below the nightmaring depth of me, if below that is Nectan's well, then we don't need to be afraid of who we are, do we? Then we can rejoice in who we are. Then we can congratulate ourselves on who we are. Then we can walk down the street, whether it be Foxrock or the square in Tala, and call out about the wonder of who I am. The wonder of who I am in the core of my being, in a deep place in my being. The wonder of who I am in the place below nightmare in me. The wonder of who I am in the place below animal and beast in me. So, to be safe. We talked yesterday about Cronku. He felt safe, sheltered in his difficult depths. Now we're talking about being not sheltered in your difficult depths. We're talking about being actually safe in your depths. So we think we're forever seeking to climb into the heights. We're forever seeking to climb out of this thing we call lower nature into higher nature. But Christianity knows something that we do not wish to know, that Christianity itself doesn't wish to know and has never allowed itself to know. We talk about two phases of the fall in the Christian story. One is when Lucifer, who had no lower nature at all, Lucifer is an archangel. Therefore, there is in him no lower nature. He is all highest of high nature. And yet he was the one who committed the supreme sin, the sin of spiritual pride, the sin of wanting to be as God. And in that, he collapsed into a pit of hell. Hell opened within him in that pride. And this is the pit that first opened in the scheme of things. Adam and Eve merely sinned in their sensuality. They merely wanted to be together in a sensual way. And it is impossible for us to sin sensually as grievously as we can sin spiritually. Lucifer sinned spiritually. Adam and Eve merely sinned sensually. So we can be desperately unsafe in our heights. I have done much more damage from my heights than I have ever done to people from my depths. I have done much more damage to people in my spirit than I've ever done in my sensuality. There's the sin, the fall of Lucifer, and there is superbia, pride. Pride, the Latin word for it is superbia, the sin of superbia, of not being content with the rung on the ladder to which you're assigned. I will not be ontologically who you created me to be. I will be as you, where you are, and in a sense maybe as you are. So, have you got this? Could it be that we are safer in our depths than we are in our heights? Or could it be that we will only be safe in the heights when we already know we are safe in our depths? Wouldn't it be wonderful? Wouldn't it be wonderful for us? You talk about winning the lotto or whatever it is like. Wouldn't it be wonderful for us, like, to wake up one morning and feel that I am safe in my depths, that I am safe in my nature? Wouldn't that be wonderful? That I am safe in my nature. High and low, I am safe in my nature. This time, the old woman didn't drive her cow through the conclusion I came to. This time, bringing a 6-year solitude in the Lochrow Hills to a sudden end. It was like a stroke. It was like waking up from waking. During an endless instant, all heights and depths had disappeared, leaving only a void, or what seemed like a void. 26 years later, sitting in my house by Linfake, I was able to say, it is in divine ground behind all depths and heights that we are safe. So, okay, we've come down to Nectan's well within ourselves. Now, having spent 6 years in solitude in the Lochrow Hills, this man has had an experience that was over in an instant, but it was like a stroke. It was like waking up from waking. We wake up from sleep, don't we? But waking is also a condition that we must wake up from, in the way that maybe it is good to wake up from sleeping. On the spiritual journey, it is essential that we wake up from waking. And this is what's happened to this man. And he is now left. Can you imagine waking up in dreamless sleep? In dreamless sleep, there's no world. There's no me. There's no sense of me in dreamless sleep, so there isn't. When I sink from dream into dreamless sleep, there is no sense that I am me. I've no sense of me. And I've no sense of a world. There's no sense of self, and there's no sense of world. Now, we go naturally down into that every night, into that place below self and below experience of self and other than self, don't we? We naturally go down there every night. Now, mystics go down there consciously. They go below. Dolores, you today quoted Eckhart about sinking into God. Now, this is what happens to us. This is where mystics go, and Eckhart is one of our greatest mystics. You go below waking and dreaming in you. You go below waking in you. You go below dreamless sleep in you. But you go there consciously. And it will seem there's no world and there's no self. And this is the extraordinary Golgotha moment, the moment the Christians talk about in Golgotha, when Jesus, exhausted at the end of his passion, his head in total exhaustion collapses onto his chest, and he looks down and he sees Adam's skull, empty skull, at the foot of the cross, and his own skull, which is his own skull, which is the skull of the whole of humanity, empty, without mind, without sense, without anything. It is as empty as it is in dreamless sleep. And this is the moment of supreme liberation that the mystics go down into. And this is what is figured in Golgotha. So this is what has happened to him. You're in a place that seems like the void. And we talked yesterday that at the moment of sexual orgasm and release and passion, in the case of Cronku, he shattered the world. Do you remember in yesterday? And he found himself in the void. That immense scream that came up out of the standing stone, which was, in a sense, his own divine member, his own linga. At that moment, he shattered the universe. He shattered sense at the level at which we have experience of self and other than self. He went down into dreamless sleep, where there is neither experience of self nor other than self. And he felt he was destroyed. And what did Maka say to him? She said, that is the place. That is the divine behind the gods and the goddesses. That is the place out of which the gods and the goddesses emerge. That is the place out of which stars in the universe emerge. And she's telling him, get used to that. That is the place when St. John of the Cross talks about the dark night of the sense, the dark night of the soul. Now, all of this has happened to this man in an instant. It happened to Cronku yesterday, and it's happening now to him. He's experiencing his stupendous Golgotha moment when you cry out in dereliction, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? But it's only your image of God that has forsaken you. It is only what you have projected onto God that has forsaken you. You are now, what's his name? Fenelon has said, the French mystic has said, God felt, God tasted, God enjoyed is indeed God, but God with those gifts that flatter the human soul. God in darkness, privation, forsakenness and insensibility is so much God. It is, so to speak, God bare and alone. He has now collapsed into God bare and alone. You have to become... If I take a thermometer and put it in water, the thermometer will tell you the temperature of the water, won't it? But it won't tell you whether the water is clear or muddy. It won't tell you the water is water of a mountain stream or of a duck pond. Whether it's salt water or sweet water, it'll tell you nothing. Whether the sun is shining in the water or the moon is shining in the water or the stars are shining in the water, it will tell you nothing. Now, supposing you have a thermometer without mercury and you push it in the water, it tells you nothing. We have to go to the place where we are registering nothing of God. I am a thermometer, like without mercury, I'm registering nothing of the world around me. You go to the place where you're registering nothing of God. You've gone beyond sense in you, you've gone beyond mind in you, you've gone beyond feeling and passion in you. And that is when you are in God. We've gone below the gender divide in us. We've gone below the seasons in us. We've gone into divine ground in us. It has taken him all of 26 years to inhabit the moment that happened to him. 26 years later, to get the hang of what happened to him, to find a way of dealing. He stayed up there for yet another 26 years in the Rock Crew Hills, seeking to integrate and to grow into and grow back out of what happened to him. 26 years later, sitting in my house by Linfake, I was able to say, it is in divine ground behind all depths and heights that we are safe. That summer, sitting in my reconstructed hut between the paps, I was able to say, it is from divine ground behind and within them that we become able for our depths and our heights. Do you see what I'm doing here? Do you see what I'm doing here, Anne? I mean, mostly we aren't able for our humanity. Sure, we aren't. You cannot be able for your humanity from the ordinary conscious level of who you are, from the unconscious level of who you are. To be able for your humanity, you have to go below your humanity. You have to go back down into divine ground. And that's when you become able for your heights and your depths. Now, this man, clearly, in the course of his initiations, has learned things, hasn't he? And he's telling us this. What is our new great teacher? What is he telling us? He's telling us it is from divine ground behind and within them that we become able for our depths and our heights. And that is great news for us human beings, isn't it? Isn't it? That we can be ultimately, we don't have to be fugitives from who we are. There's a pop song which says, isn't there, you're out there running just to be on the run. And that's us, isn't it? We are in flight from ourselves mostly, aren't we? You're out there running just to be on the run. Now this man has stood his ground, and certain huge things have happened to him, and he is able to say this. So it is from divine ground behind and within them that we become able for our depths and heights. Coming down at a turn in the path where I was only a short morning's walk away from them, I felt I was able for the sense that people had of me. I felt I was able to be their Ollamh. Opening my door, knowing that I was mirrored by the sacred river, I felt that in that depth of me that is overarched by the otherworld hazel, I had consented to be Ollamh Fódhla. And you will notice that it's from that depth of him, not from divine ground in him, that he consented to be Ollamh Fódhla. He consented to meet his people halfway. Because if he was to talk to people from divine ground in him, he would be radically, probably incomprehensible to most people. But having come back up to the otherworld well in him, then he was meeting his people halfway. And it is at that depth of him, at the otherworld well depth of him, that he consented to be Ollamh Fódhla. Isn't it an awful poverty among us that we don't have a great teacher, a great Upanishadic teacher, that we have professors of history, that we have professors of physics and botany and zoology, that we have professors of, God bless us, psychology and all kinds of things like. That the one thing we don't have is a great teacher, such as Aruni or Yajnavalkya or Udalaka among us. But maybe I will read it one last time to you, so that this, at least, you can go home with from this wonderful place, Glendalough. I won't read it. I don't need to read it anymore. I'll leave it to you. God bless you.